Welcome back to the Azure Static Web App series. In this video we're going to have a look at Blazor, so let's get started. Welcome back to the Azure Static Web App series. I'm the Hawaiian shirt coder, and we'll continue on in the series by using static web apps using various frameworks. And in this particular video I'm going to show you how to use static web apps with a non-JavaScript framework, and that non-JavaScript framework is known as Blazor WebAssembly. So in this video, much like the previous videos, we're going to walk through the process of setting up an Azure Static Web App for free using a GitHub template and also Azure, and gluing them together through a CI/CD pipeline so that when we make changes to our Blazor application in our local environment using the editor of our choice, that we can push the changes up into GitHub. GitHub will fire GitHub actions, and in turn we will end up with a new site deployed to our Azure space. So we're just going to work through the same sort of process as before, just using a different framework, a non-JavaScript framework. So even though this video isn't a video about Blazor, it's just worth giving a little mention to Blazor if you haven't come across it before. So Blazor, it's a Microsoft implementation of a W3 standard known as WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is a standard that is being ratified, and basically it allows you to write non-JavaScript code that can be executed down in the browser sandbox. And Microsoft's implementation of this WebAssembly sort of technology is known as Blazor, so which I believe stands for browser Razor, because it uses a Razor syntax if you are familiar with that Microsoft technology. Blazor is part of the overall ASP.NET family of web technologies, which includes things such as Razor and Blazor Server and MVC. But this particular technology, Blazor WebAssembly, actually runs C# code or .NET code down in the sandbox of the browser. So in essence, DLLs are getting passed down the line to the browser rather than JS JavaScript files. As well as running C# code, which of course is strongly typed, Blazor can also run JavaScript code if you want to use existing JavaScript libraries. So for example, Chart.js for drawing charts. There is a mechanism within Blazor called JavaScript interops, which let you call JavaScript methods within your Blazor C# code, and also vice versa, that JavaScript can make calls to the C# to tie the two together. So summary of the steps, like we've done in the previous sections. We're going to create a GitHub repo. We're going to get that using a nice template that has been created at github.com/staticwebdev. We're going to clone the repo to our local machine. We're going to set up a new static web app in Azure, and then we're going to make some changes to ensure that it works end to end. I'll also, as we go along, explain some of the basic structure of a Blazor project like I did with React, but like I said, this is really more to do with Azure Static Web Apps than a comprehensive overview of Blazor. So with that, let's get started with our demos. So again, in order to create this website, we need to have GitHub opened and logged in, and we also need our Azure portal open and logged in. Now I have both those open here. So here's my Azure, and here is my GitHub repository. Now, in order to shortcut this process again, there is a nice template that someone has created for us that we can reuse and repurpose for our own website. And I've got the address here in my notepad. So I'm just going to lift this out and put it in a browser. Again, this will be put in the notes in the video. And because I'm logged in already, it's recognised that I'm the Hawaiian shirt coder, so I can just give it a repository name. Let's say static blazer wasm. In fact, static blazer will be fine. Again, up to you if you make it public or private. I'm going to make mine private. Scroll down the page and create the repository from the template. And you can see it's created us a basic Blazor site. So all the Blazor code lives inside the client subfolder. And you can see the various bits that make up a Blazor WebAssembly. So all static contents, this might be your CSS, so Bootstrap or whatever would live in here, along with your images under the www root. The actual components or pages live under the pages subfolder, and at the moment we've got one component called index.razor. Any shared bits live unshared, funny enough, so that's mainly to do with layout in this case. So it's very, very basic. So the next thing is to actually pull this repository down locally. So we've got a copy of it in our editor of choice so we can make changes. So we go over to code, we copy this URL, and then we open up Visual Studio. Once Visual Studio is open, we can click on Clone a Repository, and we can paste the URL in up at the top, and we can specify the path where we want to save it. I'll just leave that as the default, and we go Clone. So once that is cloned, we should get the product structure down the left hand side. Here we go, and again it's much the same structure as we had before. So our static content under www root, our Razor components under pages, shared under here. And our program CS for all our sort of hookup and middleware that we may have for any services that we may introduce. So let's just spin this up just to see what it looks like locally. So going through an initial build, and eventually we'll get the site pop up from our template, and that's all it looks like. So just to hopefully show in the developer tools with F12, we just refresh this and see what gets downloaded. You'll see there's not really any JavaScript as such downloaded. So we do a Control F5, Go back to Network tab. We can see here that we've got no sort of JavaScript as such really getting downloaded. There's the Blazor WebAssembly is getting downloaded, which is this one here. That is all the DLLs to run the .NET framework down in the client. So that's good. We've got a clone of it down here. Next place to go is off to the actual Azure portal. So if we go over to here, and again we search for static web app in the search bar, or if we've been there before it should appear here, so we just click on this and it shows all the existing static web apps that I've got. I'm going to create a new one and I'm going to pick my subscription and I'm going to put it in my existing resource group called YouTube Web App Examples. I'm going to give it a name, which I'm going to call it the same as what I called it in GitHub. So that is Static Blazor. And it seems to be happy with that because it's provided a tick. I'm going to pick free again. I'm going to pick a location for this to run, and this is West Europe in my case. I'm going to say where am I going to get the code from. I'm going to get it from GitHub. It knows I'm already logged in, so that's fine. I can leave that as is. I can scroll down and then I can say the organization, which in my case is the Hawaiian Shirt Coder, the repository, which is Static Blazor, and the branch I want to use for the changes, which in my case is just going to be main. Carry on scrolling down, and then we have to look at the build presets. So what sort of static web app is this? And as we've seen in the other videos, there's lots of different sorts of static web app you can produce. So far we've done the custom HTML, vanilla HTML one, and we've done a React one. You can see here there is a choice for Blazor, so we pick this. And Blazor will split down into 3 locations. So where all the static stroke components live, which is in the /client. Should there be a external API that this connects to, you would specify the location in API. We haven't got one. And also where the actual CSS images and actual static content live, which is in www-root. So all of these settings here we can leave as is, even though we haven't got an API that we're going to be talking to, and we can go review and create. And then create. And what this should do is create the resource, which it's in the process of doing, and at the same time it should, if we go back to GitHub and have a look at all my repositories, we've got a repository called Static Blazor now, and hopefully if we go to actions it should be in the process of trying to do its first build. So that will chug away in the background. If we go back to here, the portal has now created that static web app resource. We can go to resource. We've now got a made up URL as before. We've got all our GitHub actions and YAML stuff over here. Click on this. At the moment it will be our holding page, but once the build has taken place, that will change to the hello world. So while that's carrying on in the background, what we can do is we can make a change in our local version of the application. So the first thing I'm going to do is in GitHub I'm just going to do a pull. So let's go to manage branches, main, right click and just pull. This will pull down the YAML file as well that we currently haven't got locally on the machine, so everything is up to date with the actual GitHub repository. There we go. So that's that one there. So we're going to add a change into this, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a new component. This isn't a course really about Blazor, but I just thought I'd show you an example of a Blazor component. So we go right click, raise a component, and then we give it a name, and I'm just going to call this counter, which if you've done anything with Blazor before, you'll see this is an out of the box example, but we're just going to craft one up ourselves. And this is what we get. So Blazor is made up of HTML and C# rather than HTML and JavaScript. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a button to the screen. We're going to just call this press. And we're going to add a H2 label to the screen. And then in the code, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a private int field, and we're going to call this counter. And we're going to default this to 0. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reference this counter in between the H2 tags. So the aim is every time we press the button, it will increment the count. So down here under the button, we also need an on click event, and we're going to call this increment. And then down here, we're going to create a new method. It's not going to do anything particularly clever, it's just going to do when we click on it. So we've got an error here. Let's call this let's call it count rather than counter. Like I said, this isn't really a Blazor tutorial, it's just to give you, if you've never seen Blazor before, just an idea that it sort of runs off the same sort of component based sort of model as you would with other sort of common spars like React and Angular. It's just done using C# code rather than JavaScript. There we go. So let's at this stage what we're going to do is include this component on the index page. Now the only thing that makes a component different to a page is that pages have a directive up the top that say @page and then have a route. For our counter we haven't created a route, so it's not a area we can directly navigate to, but we can embed it into other pages. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put a line break, and then what we're going to do is include the counter component. Which looks like HTML but isn't. There we go. So if we just spin this up locally now just to see what it looks like. The index page should load and it should say hello world as before, but it should have the counter component included. Here we go. And every time I do a press, it should increment, and all of this code is running in the browser. There's no round tripping to the server, so very much like JavaScript. So that will do as a basic example. What we'll do is push this change up into our CI/CD pipeline and see it get pushed through to Azure. Before we do that, let's just see if the initial change has gone through. So on here, that was our holding page. If we go refresh, there we go. That is our Blazor web app running on a static web site in Azure. Let's go back and push the change through now. Let's say added a counter and do a commit all and push, which should in turn back in GitHub trigger the actions to run and for it to build and deploy out to our Azure portal space. So let's just go back over here, go back over to actions, and you can see there's now a new action that's taken place, and that's just fired off, and it's going to go through all its build process again, and we should eventually end up with a change to our static web app. So we'll give that a few moments and then we'll see if the change has taken place. So welcome back. After about 2 or 3 minutes you can see the build has completed, so we can go back to our static web app and do a refresh, and you can now see the counter is in place and it functions as you'd expect, and there's no traffic going back to the server. It is purely a client application. So that's a demonstration of using a non-JavaScript framework with Azure Static Web Apps, Blazor. So I hope you found that useful. So that's the end of this video. I'm the Hawaiian Shirt Coder, and remember, keep learning, keep exploring, keep developing, and I'll see you next time.